Welcome to the Author Your Life podcast, where you can write a new script for your life and become the hero of your story. I'm your host, David McRae. You are the author of your life. Let's get started.
All you have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to you.
In my experience, there's no such thing as luck.
It is not our abilities that show what we truly are. It is our choices.
Before we launch into the podcast, I'd like to tell you about my book, Author Your Life, Become the Hero of Your Story. This is a book for people who are at a crossroads in life and want to make a fresh start. Judging by the fact that you're listening to this podcast, I suspect that you may well be one of those people. This book is going to help you to change your narrative and rewrite the scripts in life that are holding you back. This book covers the latest science and research showing you how to become the person you want to be and live the life that you want to live. I'd like to invite you to get this book not only because I feel it's a great book that's going to help you, but also it's going to support the podcast as well. I love podcasts, but sometimes all of those ads that you get can be really irrelevant and annoying when you just want to listen to a good piece of training or a good interview. So I therefore made the decision with my podcasts that number one, I wanted my podcast to be free so that everyone could listen to it. And number two, that I wasn't going to fund it through all these annoying and irrelevant adverts and commercials. Therefore, if you want to support the podcast and support all the things that I put out there for free, whether it be here on the podcast, my YouTube channel, other areas on social media, then buying a book is going to enable and help that process. So this is what we call a win-win scenario. By buying the book, you help to support my work and all the free stuff that I put out there, and you also get a really transformational book that's going to help you make those changes that you really want in your life. So if you feel you're someone who's at that crossroads in life, you're looking for a new direction, you're looking for a fresh start, then make sure you get this book. Author Your Life, Become the Hero of Your Story is available on Amazon in ebook, paperback, and audiobook. Whatever your preferred medium, it's there for you to go get right now. Hello, story changers, and welcome back to another episode of the Author Your Life podcast. On today's episode, we have Forrest Leichtberg. As a young man, Forrest battled a life-threatening condition and emerged victorious, filled with a desire to help people fulfill their highest potential through the power of community and positivity. So began the story of the Consciousness Network, Forrest's brainchild. Beginning with its inaugural event in early 2016, the Consciousness Network immediately attracted the public and the press as people from all walks of life came to find life-affirming answers through its programs. Within 6 months, Mayor Helene Schneider and the Santa Barbara City Council issued a joint proclamation congratulating both Forrest and the Consciousness Network for the success of the organization and its promotion of community and positivity. Along the way, there has been an outpouring of support in the form of expert consultants, volunteers, and media coverage, creating a stage for some of the country's most influential and globally recognized speakers and presenters, including Jack Canfield, Gay Hendricks, Katie Hendricks, Dr. Dan Siegel, a collaboration with Deva Premal Miten, and many more. The Conscious Network focuses on improving spiritual, physical, and environmental well-being through community organization and award-winning programs that help bring true life improvement, healing, service, and transformation to the community. Its goal is to improve the community's awareness of and responses to the physical, spiritual, and environmental issues facing society today. In this interview, you will learn why you have to stay in the middle of the spectrum in life, the difference between successful and meaningful, why division is the biggest obstacle to love, and it's okay to not know your ultimate purpose in life. You're going to learn this and so much more in this interview with Forrest Leichtberg. Forrest, welcome to the Author Your Life podcast.
Thank you for the opportunity.
So Forrest, it's great to have you on. You're doing some really interesting work, and I can't wait to dive into more of what you do and find out some of your experiences and lessons that have led up to this And I think we're just going to start from the top. So you run an organization, you could almost call it a movement. So you run the Consciousness Network.
Yes.
Why did you start the Consciousness Network? What's the story behind where it all began?
Sure. Well, I always had an interest in, or a deep interest in personal development, spiritual growth, principles, success principles, all these kind of things. Authoring your life. How can we not?
Nice plug.
In the most empowered way that we can and be of service to humanity. And so what I noticed though is there were a lot of people I was meeting who were of like mind, who thought in the similar ways. So there was this term that I learned years ago that often people will call that community the conscious community. It's a community of individuals who share values like compassion and awareness. They want to be of service to something larger than themselves. They're interested in self-healing. They're interested in harmonious relationships, all these kind of things. And so what I did notice, however, was that where I was living in Santa Barbara County, California, there was no kind of force that brought the different silos within that community to get together, because there are different groups. You got the yoga community, you got the conscious business community, you got the holistic health community, or the integrative medical community. And so there's lots of different silos, but I wanted to create a hub as a networking platform for them all to come together and see what happened, because this community that shares these values, they really have the heart for service. And so what is possible in terms of the impact that we can collectively create together when people who share the values that can heal the world are actually coming together regularly. And so that was the initial idea behind it, and it evolved. I had no idea what it would turn into, but it went very well in the very beginning from the start, and it kept on growing, so just kept on doing it. And that's sort of how it started.
This might be a really obvious question, but I want to see if the answer is not so obvious.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think has changed for the people who are in this community now that they've come together? What is the difference when you get into a community of like-minded people like this?
Sure. Well, life, I really feel that life, just living life in the world can be very difficult at times. And so people need reminders, and they need to be refreshed spiritually. And to have a community that they come together with on a regular basis gives them an opportunity to do that. And so it refreshes their awareness of who they really are. It reminds them of the truth of who they really are, especially because they have a community around them, hundreds of people reflecting that back to them. And so they're like little reminders of what's possible. And so when somebody comes once a month or once every couple months to one of these programs, that lasts. That the information they learn from the speakers, the connections they make with people, that lasts through over time. And it's not that it's the only thing that they need. It's important that they have personal practices. You and I covered earlier that habits are really important, and meditation, exercise, whatever they are in your life. But community is one of those central pillars. And I think a lot of people in our community can feel a little lonely. And so this is an opportunity for people to get connected with a community in their own local area that can meet that need for connection with people of like mind.
Mm-hmm. So Forrest, I've met quite a few people who have attempted stuff like this and bringing together like-minded people. Yours seems to have really gained some momentum and some energy to it. You mentioned that you have speakers along at some of your events, and some of the speakers who have been coming along recently, you had Jack Canfield very recently, you've had folks like Hendricks. Like, these are big names in the personal development, personal growth kind of field. So obviously they're not going to endorse a heap of rubbish. They obviously see something in this network that's possibly different from lots of other similar projects and similar kind of ambitions.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think has allowed your network to gather this momentum and energy where perhaps others have kind of fizzled out and died?
Sure. So there's a great teaching that I learned from actually Tony Robbins, who I was really a big fan of 6-7 years ago. I still like him, but I was really a big follower of his work. And what he says at his seminars is raise your standards. The secret to life is to raise your standards. And I think that it really comes down a lot to that. And a lot of people in the spiritual space or the coaching space, there is a tendency to, there's a lot of air people in there. There's a lot of upper
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
like, and the key that has sustained the organization over this time and has created it into being perceived as being a professional, viable entity is that there has been a focus on not just spreading a message of raising consciousness or these kind of things, but business savvy, like worldly business savvy, contracts, insurance, governmental regulations, law, or business law, all these very grounded, practical things that are necessary to understand in order to have to run an organization very professionally. And so I think that's part of the secret. Is it's wonderful to have a leading edge mind where you really can help lead people to their true nature, to their potential, and to author their life on their terms according to their heartstrings. And if you have the force of worldly and business savvy behind you, and real world practical nitty gritty stuff, and you hold yourself to a standard of blending the two, I think there's a lot of power in that. Mm.
Oh yeah, I definitely agree that you've got to get that balance between two, because I think if you move in either direction too much, that's when people start losing essences of who they are and what they're supposed to do in life. If you look at people just focus on the material, they try and get the job, the career, the salary, the house, the car, and they're flipping miserable. And then you see people who they've got all the material and none of the spiritual. And then you see people, as you're describing, who have too much air, they're too spiritual. And sometimes you meet these folks and you think like, are you even in the physical world? Like, you have a physical body, like physical isn't bad. You don't have to lose the physical to be spiritual as well. So I think having this blend between the two of, being material is awesome. Like, yeah, sure, you want to have more money than less money. Yeah, it's nice to live in a nice house and have a good job and things. And being spiritual is really cool as well. Yeah, having that connection with your authentic self and the essence of the universe, that's cool as well. But bring the two together. Don't neglect one or the other. If you connect one or the other, you're losing half your power as a human being. We have this wonderful ability to tap into the material and the spiritual as well. Don't sacrifice one for the sake of the other.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And I think people, at certain times we're called to lean more into the physical side of it. And at other times in our lives, other stages of those phases, we're called to lean on the more spiritual side of ourselves. And there have been times, until actually recently, until a few weeks ago, when I was leaning on my physical human self. Like, I was not interested in learning about how to manage my energy and how to live in the present moment all the time. I was really interested in my human worldly self. And to be honest, I was happier than I ever was when I was just floating in the clouds. And in the last few weeks, I've really come to bring the more spiritual side in again, but in such a way as to integrate the two more. And that's the difference, in that before I was really focused on learning how to master different skills in the world. I was really spiritually focused. I mean, that was what brought me into this interest of creating a community grounded on spiritual values. But the actual business, the nature of the business of doing that forced me to learn those skills and focus on that more physical, worldly side. And I'm so glad it did, because I found that the more grounded I became, the happier I became. But by blending the two now, I notice that results are able to be created without driving hard every single moment of the day. So there's more of a balance.
Yeah.
It's nice to bring in that more spiritual side, because there is, the ability to create life on our terms, and there is the ability to create with grace and have something beyond ourselves support our intentions and desires. And it's also very important to take action personally. But, getting caught too much on one end of the spectrum either way can be pretty disempowering. So
So, Forrest, you've just touched a little bit on some of your own development and your own journey. I think everyone in personal development has a story, and I know for a fact that you're no different. Would you mind sharing some of your story and some of your own personal journey before the Conscious Network ever kind of came into being, and what brought you into this path in the first place?
Sure. All right. So when I was 16, uh, I started reading these kinds of books. I was really enthralled with them. And then a year later, I was struck with an illness. And for the next 4 5 years or so, I suffered in almost constant pain. I mean, excruciating pain. I had a benign, non-cancerous tumor in my parathyroid gland that surgically was removed. But all the chaos and havoc it wreaked on my body and my mind, I mean, it was really unbearable. And so for years, I um, most of my attention was on how to heal, and that was the main focus of my entire life for those years. Um, so I learned and educated myself about all things, how to live a healthy lifestyle, nutrition, supplements, stress management, all these kind of things. And a lot of them seem to diminish the pain temporarily. Like if I would exercise, all right, the pain would go away for a few moments, but then it would quickly come back. And so none of it really did the trick until one day I just gave up and I said, look, if there is a higher power out there, I was 22 or 21. I said, if there is one, I'm surrendering. Like I've tried everything I can do and everything I can think of at least. And so I surrendered and said, if there's something I'm not seeing here, please, universe, send it my way. Within about a month or two, I started working with a medical intuitive, and she sort of guided me to different natural methods of healing, like different supplements, essential oils, lifestyle choices, dietary plans, dietary choices. And 4 months later, I was no longer suffering. It was gone. And so I remember multiple moments of realizing that I would live a normal life again. In two days' time, trying one thing. 2 days later, knowing, wow, like this is working. I can't believe it. What's happening? This has never happened before. And so it was sort of like my little healing miracle, right? that I've been able to live a normal, high functioning life ever since. And so I think that's when it sort of really dawned upon me that this stuff can work. I mean, I had the faith before, but this was like living proof. This was like after giving up and surrendering, and each day like doing that, then finding the right person who led me to the right specific interventions that I could use. I mean, really specific, like 2 drops of this a day, 5 drops.
Yeah.
And every time I did them, they seemed to take away another aspect of my issues. So that's a little bit about my story. But I think it's very important that I share that the pain was unimaginable to me. I mean, it was so, anyways. And there was a lot to learn in that. There's a lot to learn in that about death and mortality and like, what's this life about? What are the values that will really create a fulfilling, meaningful life?
Hmm.
Eventually, life became more about how can it be meaningful, more meaningful rather than more successful? And I do believe there's a place for both. But if you're reaching out to be successful, it's more about you. It's more about, I want to be successful. If you're reaching for a life that's most meaningful, then you're focused not only on you, but also on those around you and the world around you. How can my life be of service? How can it be meaningful to those around me? And that's when you start to bring in the values like compassion and awareness and growth and self-awareness and community and this kind of thing. And once that happens, and once you infuse your choice making with those values, your choice making then becomes conscious choice making. And once you have conscious choice making in your life, then you're the author of your life.
And with conscious choice making comes the conscious network.
That's right.
Well, you teased us there, Forrest, so I'm going to have to pull the string.
Okay.
You said that you'd had all these thoughts about mortality and death and the meaning of life. So I'm going to have to ask you, Forrest, what is the meaning of life?
Oh, God. You know what? I can only tell you let me think for a moment. You know, the meaning of life to me is going to be different than it is to any other person. The meaning of life. Well, I honestly think there is no meaning to life in the big picture. It's really the meaning you give for you.
Yeah.
That's the opportunity that we have here, you know, in these bodies, in this life. Like, what is it going to mean to you? And that takes listening to your heart, listening to your spirit. What's gonna, you know, instead of the world saying you need to be this way or you need to be this way, this is your path, or doing things or acting in such a way as to please others. You know, it's more about listening to your heart. What's gonna make your life meaningful?
Nice. I like it. And I actually liked the answer that you gave previously, talking about this distinction between successful and meaningful. And I think that's really important. And a lot of these words and phrases that we use are always so layered. We use things like happiness and success and purpose. And it's like, well, okay, what is happiness? What is success? What is purpose? It's a little bit different for everyone. We've got these broad ideas of, okay, we've got a rough idea of that's more happy than that, that's more successful than that, but putting real concrete terms to some of these words and phrases that we use, or conscious or consciousness, there's another one that we use so often, is what does that mean for you specifically? Because everyone's going to have their different interpretation of what that means for them and how they kind of bring it about in their lives.
Right. That's neat. And you know, there are so many different teachers and authors and coaches and experts. Now they're teaching their truth. And it might be true. Like, they might be teaching truth or principles that you can apply that are powerful and that can nurture your growth. But you know, there have been certain teachers that I've taken in my life, whether through reading their books or personally, that they emphasize a certain aspect of being on your path, on your true path. So let's take Eckhart Tolle, for example, the power of now, live in the present moment. And that's wonderful. And I love to practice it. But there are other things that light me up more than not that I'm not going to pay attention to the present moment, just that my interest, my curiosity leads me in a little bit of a different direction intellectually and in my heart. So like, if I'm more interested in things like creating really radical health or manifestation, how do you create and author your life? And so everybody has a different kind of flavor of their own personal spirituality or their own path. And there are all these teachers, but it's easy to get lost in, well, I need to be like that because this teacher says that I should. Or I need to be like that because Eckhart Tolle says the present moment is the most important thing for you to focus on. And the truth is, what you really need to be focusing on is what's your truth, and naturally and authentically. Because when there's a self-image that you're trying to live up to, that's running counter to who you really are. That's running counter to what all of this is about. And so finding your true self-expression is very important. And It's taking those times for stillness, taking those times to meditate, to journal, the things you teach people, So
You talked about in your story of healing and recovery in particular that you just found the right things. It was it was literally the magic potions at times which were bringing it in. I'm sure you've got maybe not magic solutions in your life right now, but things that really work for you on a consistent basis, that keep you alive, that keep you vibrant, that keep you healthy, that keep you stimulated, engaged. What would you say are some of these magic potions that you've got now, things that you do on a consistent basis that allow you to be the version of yourself that you want to be?
That's great. Well, I think it all starts in the mind. So I'm just going to start off the relationship with your mind. There are all sorts of processes and games you can play, processes that you can utilize to work with the needle and thread of your own mind. And it's really about shifting your focus and your attention in such a way as to create well-being. That's when you're in your power. And so things like focusing on what I can appreciate about the moment and what's around me, or just my life in general, what is available that I can appreciate. And what I've noticed is that it's endless. Like if I get started appreciating some things, I can always find another thing to appreciate. There's always something to appreciate. And so deliberately looking for that is one of the key practices, I think. And even once a day, I sit down and I take a topic of my life, whether it's my money or my finances or my relationships or my body or whatever it might be. And I just journal for 15, 20 minutes, all the positive aspects. What do I love about this? And it's that kind of intention to work with your own mind from the start of the day, at the start of each day. That is, I think that's the most essential part of all of this stuff. Because if you can't have a conscious relationship with your own mind, then it's taken you where it wants to go, where it's going. And frankly, it doesn't even know where it's going. It doesn't have that kind of consciousness. It's not saying, well, the best choice for me as Forrest's mind is to go in that direction. No, it's just kind of chaos.
Yeah.
So you want to use your mind. You don't want to be used by your mind. And that's authoring your life. And other practices, though, I've always found it helps to be supported by physical health practices and disciplines, paying attention to diet and nutrition. Supplements have been really helpful for me. And all these things, anything that can make you stronger in yourself, will give you more competence and ability to work with your mind and create the life that you want. Exercise, weightlifting, aerobic exercise, sun, self-care. What we're really talking about is self-care. That's been a huge thing in self-care.
Yeah, it's like we're talking about a little bit earlier with having this balance. You can't just have the body and you can't just have the mind. There's people out there with the body, they've got six packs, they look brilliant, but they're depressed, they're anxious, they're unhappy. And then on the other side, you've got people who are maybe sort of relatively kind of cheerful and have a kind of optimistic, positive disposition, but their body's a mess and they're going to die in 5 years' time if they keep on living the way that they're living physically. So you've got to have both together. You bring the physical together and you bring the mind together, and you're more powerful with the two of them combined than trying to follow either of them separately in isolation.
That's great. That's great. So, then you become more whole.
Yeah.
So, very cool. Very cool.
Yeah. So let's expand beyond just focusing on you, and let's go back to talking about community and connection and network, because that's what your mission is really all about just now, is bringing people together. I'm sure you've learned a lot about relationships and interaction and communication in the time that you have been bringing people together and fostering this community. And this question is a big one. And this question is, how do we bring more love into the world? So not just more love for ourselves, not just more love in the consciousness network. How do we expand this to everyone? you and me across other sides of the Atlantic? How do we get it so that love is spreading across the world?
That's a great question. Well, we're all connected now, right? Social media, the internet. And so there is an ability to influence someone who wouldn't, people we've never met before, who live across the world. Um, how do you spread more love in the world? Well, again, it just feels to me like going back to that choice making, like conscious choice making, and asking, well, what is the loving action here? What would love do here? There's a lot of division right now, and there's a lot of people with opposing viewpoints, and those people with opposing viewpoints, a lot of them are not open to the humanity of those who share an opposing viewpoint. And so in the world, it's like that's not adding to the peace and the well-being of the world. I mean, to have an enemy in your own mind that you feel anger or hatred toward, or that you completely shut out, that's not adding to what you want to see in the world. That's contributing to the problem that you're focusing on. And so I think it's really important to be open, being open and accepting to who others are, even if their intellectual view might be opposing to yours, in opposition to yours. A human being is more than just their intellectual view on things or their political view of things. And so really seeing people for who they are, that seems to be really important right now.
Yeah, I think division is the really big word, and that's why I asked that question on the podcast, because I see love is the solution to the division, and I think the more we can start thinking intentionally about love and well, how do we spread love and how do we connect with other people, then that is how we overcome and push through this division that just seems rife at the moment. And I don't know what's happened in the last 10 years. Everything seemed to be going great, and we're getting more integrated, and sort of the barriers were coming down, and in the last 10 years, and certainly the last 5 years, it just seems to have gone and split people up.
It's very divided. I've seen friendships break up because they share opposing viewpoints. And really, when that happens, it's the grip of fear. Like, oh my God, fear that we're at the end, or we're repeating Nazi Germany or something. And if somebody else is not sharing that viewpoint, then they're contributing to that.
Yeah.
And it's fear that the mind takes you on. And fear is like, that phrase, fear, what is it? FEAR.
False evidence appearing real. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's really important to turn that around. Like what we talked about with your relationship with your mind. How can you become more aware and conscious of where am I not acting with love? And how in this moment can I act with love instead of fear? And sometimes it might just mean not saying anything, or refraining to say something that you really feel the impulse to say. It's very interesting, in the fight for what's right, or what we perceive to be right, there's often an energy of aggression or anger and fear. And so that naturally will cause a force of opposition to it. It's just the way it is. If you oppose something, that energy of opposition will create another opposition to you. And so it's really important to be open-hearted.
So
and
for us, sorry.
What's your viewpoint that you think is just absolutely inappropriate? Like, how can we hold compassion for the person? Because we're not going to change them. It's like compassion is like that's when you free yourself of the suffering of your anger. So for what it's worth, there's my response to your question.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I'd like to start rounding up all of these big ideas that we've been discussing, and I always do this with a few final questions.
Sure.
The answers to these questions can be as long and detailed and reflective as you want them to be. There's no time constraints, no rapid fire manner in these questions. The answers are what they are. And the first of these questions ties back into something you're talking about a little bit earlier, where you're talking about appreciation. Forrest, what are you grateful for today?
Oh, just, well, living in a first world country in Southern California, food is available. Every meal is a gift. Food is available. I have a bed, a home, bed to sleep in, a home to live in, food to eat. It's beautiful weather. There's safety here. There's peace. There's not people shooting each other up around here. There's not a war going on outside my home. I think the simple things that's what most hits me right now. I was living in New York last year for a couple months, for about 4 months, and what struck me most was when I saw people begging for 1 penny at a time, blind, disabled, and I thought, there's no way I can ever really put myself in those shoes. I'll never understand what that's really like. It's a totally other order of reality. And so since then, I've practiced being really appreciative of the little basic things that life is so full because of that. So there's the answer. There's my answer to the question.
I think not to draw attention from that very poignant point on the beggars, but for me in particular, I've been looking at the reflection in your window behind you. For those of you who are watching the video, you'll be able to see that. And as I look at my window in Scotland, I've got rain clattering against it. And over there in California, it looks absolutely beautiful. So I would 100% be appreciating that if I was sitting in your chair right now.
Summertime. No, this is summer. We have our problems too, but today it's a beautiful day.
We were also talking earlier before we started recording, actually. We did a quick age swap, and we're both in our 20s. And if we're both lucky and we look after ourselves and we do all these sort of healthy rituals and things, it'd be really cool to see 2100. It'd be really cool to see the next century after this. And I think the way we're going with health and technology, I think we've got a pretty good chance. But let's face it, by the time we get there, we are going to be old. We are going to have less abilities than we do now here in 2019. So I think it's really the generation after us who are really inheriting the 21st century, and they're really going to shape what the 22nd century looks like when we get to 2100. And I think it's really important that we educate the next generation and we equip them in the right way to deal with all the challenges and pressures that are coming and are going to come in this century. So for you, with your wisdom, Forrest, if you had a young child in front of you, only about 5 years old, and you had to tell them something to prepare them for the life that they're about to live, what would you be telling that child?
It's a great question. You have good questions.
Thank you.
What would I be telling that child? And if they were really listening?
Oh yeah, that's the other part.
If they were really going to listen to it and apply it, what would I share? And I suppose this applies, like if it were collectively applied, then it could create a very nice. So, here's I think what I would suggest to the 5-year-old is again deeply focusing on deeply being in touch with their heart and what would again feel most meaningful. It's really about the feeling, the joy. What would light them up with joy and meaning and purpose? What's most true to their own heart and spirit, and to follow that, to not stray from that, because the world wants you to stray from that. So follow that, and by following that, it shines a light on others around you. And so then you can become, you know, a worker for the common good just by being yourself. And you know, I think the ego likes to get caught up in an image of what it wants to become. Like, oh, I want to be an author that sells millions of books around the world, or the next Tony Robbins, or whatever it may be. But it seems like really even more crucial important is day to day in your own personal relationships and interactions, and in the unfolding of your day to day life. What's your impact? Like, by just being you and showing up. Like, how are you influencing those around you and impacting the world around you? And it doesn't mean that you have to be anything other than who you truly are in your essence. And so a 5-year-old probably couldn't understand what these words, all of them, but if I could find a way to distill the essence of these words in such a way as they could understand and receive it, then I would say that. Yeah.
So moving from the start of life to the end of life, as I said, hopefully we see 2,100. We live well into 3 figures, but ultimately we are all mortal. We're all going to have our final day one day into the future.
Mm-hmm.
Forrest, when you get to that day and you look back on the life that you've lived, what legacy do you want to have left during your time on Earth?
I want to say I don't know, and it's irrelevant to me right now, because when I get there, my answer is going to be completely different than it would be now.
A nice non-answer. I like it.
You know, it's so hard to answer for me. If I could live the way that I just, expanded on, in the way that I would suggest for a 5-year-old to live, that would be nice. That would be nice. That's probably would be it. My answer will be different at that time.
Yeah.
But I think at the fundamental core, if I could stay true to my unique soul's purpose and my heart's unique purpose, and stay true to that throughout my life while I'm navigating through the various challenges that are there, that would be a pretty great life, because I do believe that that's the kind of life that can create the maximum impact, for you uniquely, for me uniquely, for anybody uniquely. That's the path that will impact the world the most powerfully. Mm-hmm. And so I would say that would be it.
I'm glad you gave a non-answer to that and said, admitted that you don't know what the answer would be. You're kind of leaving space for growth and regression. I actually had a very similar moment probably about a couple of months ago, and I was talking with someone about purpose, and I said, if you'd asked me a year ago what my purpose was, I'd have started listing all these things and saying, my aspirations and where I want to go and what I want to do in life. And it's not that those things aren't true, but ultimately I don't know what my purpose is, because how can I possibly predict the future? How can I predict how I'm going to grow and develop as a human being? How can I predict what opportunities and challenges are going to come up in 20, 30, 40 years time that I want to be a part of working on and solving and growing? So I don't know what that path is. All I know is the compass. All I know is the signpost saying this is the path I want to take. but actually down that path, I don't know all of the various things that are going to come up in that path. So I don't know what my ultimate destination to that journey is going to be. So I've changed my answer, or actually I'm quite comfortable saying I don't know what my purpose is, and that's really good, because if I knew it now, then there is no scope and space for any more growth and development over the rest of my life, which is crazy. I'm wasting 3/4 of my life if I don't grow and develop from now.
Excitement or just possibilities that you never really thought of.
Yeah.
And it seems like there might be different layers of purpose, like on a deeper level of purpose, like really following your true north, your real true north, is a great deeper layer of purpose that doesn't have to do with the changing tides of purpose throughout our life. Right? That it's more fundamental. It's more like, if you listen to that, then the tides that change, the purpose tides that change, will be true, based on your unique truth, and not the world's purpose that it wants to demand from you. So yeah, man, it's cool to leave room for the universe to
do its thing.
or to surprise you, or blow you away, or whatever it might be. And it's so funny because, well, maybe it's not always funny, but it's interesting because some of the things that are most painful end up being so pivotal. Like, what's that woman's name? She had like stage 4 cancer and she was dying. She died, and then she came back to life. Now she's a very famous author. I forgot her name.
Wow, I've not heard of that at all. That sounds incredible.
Yeah, and so that one experience, a very painful experience of hers, um, has impacted like millions of people, because it's shed light on what's possible for them and what's really important to them in their life to be living. And so it's like sometimes it's so funny how life works. It's like, what's really good and what's really bad? Well, maybe there's just a higher good for our higher evolution.
Yeah. Well, I want to leave some space and scope for our audience to continue to grow and develop. So for everyone who's been listening so far and they've enjoyed your thoughts, they've enjoyed your lessons, they've enjoyed your message, where would you be directing people to go to find out a little bit more about who you are, what you teach, and what you do?
Oh, thanks. Well, you can go if you want to check out the Consciousness Network. We're going to start doing live streaming and video replays of our events with Jack Canfield, Gay Hendricks. We got collaboration with Deva Premal Miten earlier this year, and Dr. Dan Siegel is speaking. So, anyways, every couple months there's a very prominent speaker, and so you'll be able to tune into that soon over live stream and video replays. So you can go to www.thecn.org. thecn.org, and there is a sign up page. It's called, you just click join, and you'll be able to get email updates from us about these events that are occurring. And then personally, I don't have a personal website. That's, that organization is if you want to reach out personally, you can email me, Forrest, Forrest, at thecn.org. Or you can find me on Facebook. Facebook was a great way to connect. So, yeah.
Sounds good. We'll pop all that in the show notes. And all that's left to say, Forrest, is thank you for joining us on the Off Your Life podcast. I've enjoyed your thoughtfulness, and I've also enjoyed the number of plugs for Off Your Life that you managed to get into this interview. You definitely have the record for the number of times you managed to bring that into conversation and relate it back to the title of the podcast, which is brilliant. I don't think anyone has ever done it more than like once or twice. You've been like scattering it throughout this entire conversation, which has been brilliant. So extra brownie points for that. Talking about what I appreciate, that's what I appreciate from today's conversation.
Very good.
It just made me chuckle.
It's been a real pleasure, and I really enjoyed this. Thank you for the opportunity to share. It's something that I haven't. I I've provided a platform for others to share their wisdom with groups of people, but I really appreciate the opportunity to share some of the things that I've learned, and I hope that some of it's valuable for your audience.
Brilliant. Thank you, Forrest. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd appreciate it hugely if you could head over to iTunes and leave a rating and review for the podcast. With your review, please be as honest and detailed as you can be, because with honest and detailed feedback, that helps me to adapt and grow this podcast to most serve you, the listener. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, then make sure you subscribe to the podcast. That way you aren't going to miss any of the future episodes that we've got lined up for you. Until next time, remember that you are the author of your life. You hold the pen, and you can write whatever script you want for yourself. So go out today and write yourself a beautiful story.